Alright, YouTube, I'd like to talk about Satan. And that is an interesting concept and one that I've remarkably covered before. But I'm going to tell you a few things about Satan and about Christianity and about Hinduism that you probably don't know. I've been enlightened as to the views of theistic Satanists finally after not having encountered many of them for a great deal of time. I've talked to devil worshippers before, but I've never talked to people who actually brand themselves theistic Satanists. So I'd like to point out a few things about Satan. We all know that Christianity as it spread, and Judaism as well, in whatever areas it was found, had the strange habit, and I'm sure this has happened with other religions as well, of adopting outside gods, dogmas, and rituals, and incorporating them into themselves. That is to say, certain Sumerian gods, certain Zoroastrian figures, and so forth, became demons within Judeo-Christianity over the period of time that it was growing in the Roman Empire and then the former Roman Empire. That is, that the deities which pagan groups worshipped as good beings were taken and transmogrified into evil beings by the Christians and the Jews. Literally, the going trend in that time period was, yes, these pagan gods do exist, but they are evil. I would note that the idea of Platonism takes the archetype of Zeus and applies it to the Christian God and says Christianity and Hellenism are the same thing. It's just that all the other gods are just expressions of Zeus, and Zeus is actually Jehovah. And the very Platonism-riddled modern Christianity fails to understand this concept, that the early Christians were essentially equating the Hellenistic pantheon with different attributes of what is now known as Jehovah, the father of Jesus, and of course, in some cases, Jesus himself. So I'd like to talk about the linguistic roots of Satan, something which you must understand. There are two possible and likely roots for this term, and it's slightly confused as to whether these were modified at different dates, as to whether it's possible that literally both pagan traditions did get incorporated into the modern understanding of Satan. That would be Seth from Egypt, or Set, or any of a number of different possible pronunciations, which is now worshipped theistically in the Setian tradition, as well as a figure from essentially Hinduism, Proto-Hinduism, likened with the term Satyam, which would be, roughly translated to wisdom. That is, that the concept of Satan roots in multiple traditions. You've got the Jewish influence, you've got the idea of the devil, or, well, not the devil, but Lucifer, getting poured into the mix. Satan is really a melting pot of Lucifer, the fallen angel, the rebel, Set, the Egyptian god of darkness, which adds the dark aspect, which of course the Jews liken to evil, so now he's evil, and an inverted version of this Satyam, this concept from Hinduism, which stood for wisdom, inverted to make it lies, and then poured into the mix. There's also numerous demons, of course. If you've ever read the Gosha or any of a million other grimoires, you'll notice that a lot of these demons are actually pagan figures. The idea of Ammon, one of the demons found in the Ars Gosha, is in fact an Egyptian god, and in fact appears in the form of that Egyptian god in the Ars Gosha. So what Christianity did was not describe or invent a new character that other religions didn't already know about. It merely took the attributes of pagan deities and various, pagan spiritual concepts, and it poured it into a mix, occasionally changing or inverting things, and turned it into Satan. So when I say that Satan doesn't exist, I mean Satan, the Christian concept, does not exist. It's an invented term taken from various pagan sources. Yes, these pagan deities were worshipped as good. That is, Seth, although at different times in Egypt Seth was identified with evil. Generally speaking, Seth enjoyed worship as an actual good deity with good attributes. The idea of Satyam or Satya in Hinduism, of course, wisdom and enlightenment. There's actually one of the, Kali Yuga, and then there's Satya Yuga, which is the highest cycle of wisdom and of law and order and religiosity and spiritual enlightenment. This term purely means wisdom and truth. It got inverted into ignorance and lies by the Christians, who probably encountered this term, realized it was linked with a pagan religion, and said, no, this is actually evil, changed the term a little bit into Satan, and there are different permutations of that as well, and then they made Satan. The devil is even a different concept altogether than even Satan or Lucifer is. You've got to understand, Satan, Lucifer, and the devil are three totally different things. The idea of the devil is more taken from the concept of the Jewish demons in some of their mythology as sort of a spirit which tempts people to do evil, more or less in mischievous ways, mostly for its own entertainment. That is, that it's not some lord of the afterlife, lord of the underworld, lord of evil. It's just essentially equates to the jinn of Islam. That would be the closest approximation for the devil that you could possibly get. So what Christians don't realize is that these figures that they consider to be extant, these figures that they believe exist, they say Lucifer, Satan, the devil, they're all the same thing. Three totally different linguistic roots, three totally different cultural roots, three totally different characteristics that got lumped together into this almost all-powerful adversary of man that at the end of the world also becomes a fourth figure, which is the Antichrist. I would like to point out also that the idea of the Antichrist itself, taken from Revelation is widely understood to be symbolic in nature. It refers to ancient Rome. As I've pointed out before, 666, number one, and this was pointed out to me by someone who practices Kabbalah and Judaism, that the number 666 actually is a linguistic word. It's taken from Hebrew linguistics and has its own separate meaning, which I won't get into, but it has nothing to do with the Antichrist. It also coincidentally equals Nero Caesar. The word Nero Caesar, translated into Hebrew and numbered, equals 666. Nero was, of course, the great oppressor of Christians and Jews, the symbol of Roman tyranny and intimidation of the populace, these various pagan groups as well as the Jews and Christians. That's too big a coincidence to overlook. But the fact is that refers to Rome. So you see, Christians, when they talk about the Antichrist coming, when they talk about the end of the world, when they talk about this hideous being that wants to tempt you into a lake of fire for eternity, they don't know what they're talking about. They haven't studied the linguistics or the cultural application of these figures, because what Christians have been taught is that the Bible is inerrant, it's the divine word of God. Most Christians also have been taught that the proper way to interpret that scripture comes from a specific sectarian dogma. That is, the Baptists will interpret it one way, the Catholics will interpret it another way, the Methodists will interpret it another way. And each of these groups, although they have some similarities, have their own differences. So the Christians have been raised, those that are actually religious. See, I don't debate with liberal Christians. I may tell them I don't believe their God exists, but they're not going to debate me over it because they don't care. Religious Christians, by and large, are absolutely ignorant of the history and the linguistics and the cultural aspect of their own religion. That's what makes these people so difficult to debate. Not because you're not correct and you don't understand. This is legitimate, factual, recorded history. You can prove that. Even the Catholics will admit that Revelation is symbolic. You can prove that these things are the case. The thing that you can't do is convince them of that fact, because it's been so rammed down their throat from the time that they were born that yes, indeed, Satan is this little red man with pitchfork and horns, He tempts people, he leads them to hell. Hell is eternal, all sinners go there. Things which in many cases are actually extra-biblical to begin with. The Bible doesn't dwell on the concept of Satan very much. You'll notice there are very few mentions of Satan in the Bible. You'd notice that the linguistic roots of Satan come from Vedic or come from Egyptian paganism. So learning these things is important to the community of non-believers. We need to understand these things because it helps us to understand the pathology of the Judeo-Christian religion and Islam as well, to a lesser extent, because Islam, of course, adopts most of the Christian ideals. It just has the Quran and some more cultural teachings, but it's rooted in Judeo-Christianity. It's important for us to know these things because it is true, it is factual, it is definite. We know that this is the case. We can trace the linguistics of the word Satan. We can trace the cultural aspect of the devil or Lucifer too. We know that that's the case. I would point out Lucifer merely means light bearer. It's actually a term to denote wisdom, secular wisdom that is, not religious wisdom. So these are just some things that Christians, if you're watching this video and you're Christian, go ahead and study these things that I'm telling you. You don't need to take my word for it. Literally study some Christian history or religious history in general, it doesn't matter. Study linguistics. Linguistic anthropology is one of the best classes you can take if you're going to a college that actually offers it. It's very interesting. It gets into all sorts of spiritual aspects. If you also apply it to Christianity, Gnosticism, Islam, Judaism, all these other religions, you'll see some very interesting patterns start to emerge, which I wouldn't have seen certainly if I hadn't taken anthropology and I hadn't studied religion and religious history. I wouldn't see those patterns. I would probably still be a Christian. Parting note, I'd like to reveal one of the major reasons I'm Christian. I mean, not Christian, sorry. I'm obviously not a Christian. It's actually because of Christians. See, I started going to ICQ Christianity Chat in 2007. That's the same year I deconverted from Christianity, became an atheist, later a Satanist in about 2009. The reason I deconverted is because I witnessed Christians launching hate-filled attacks and totally illogical arguments against every unbeliever they could find. Didn't matter what the unbeliever was saying. The non-believer could be espousing love and peace and kindness and all the things Jesus did. They would still be branded as a hell-bound sinner and doom and gloomed by the entire Christian populace of that room. That helped convince me to become an atheist. So a shout out to all the ICQ Christians there. Some of you are probably partially responsible for me becoming a Satanist. So thank you very much for helping me see the light and leaving your cult. That's about all. Study the linguistics of these terms. You'll be astonished at what you find. Ave Satanas.